The protagonist of this story had only one desire in life: to reach the very peak of martial arts. But as time went on, he realized that even if he spent his entire life training, it would never be enough to achieve his dream. He simply wasn't destined to reach the summit of martial mastery. Still, because of his deep desperation, he refused to give up. He decided to chase an ancient legend. A tale from long ago about a divine dragon that guarded a golden fruit said to grant immortality to whoever consumed it. After a fierce and deadly battle against the divine dragon guardian, he finally reached the sacred place where the legendary fruit was said to grow. He could hardly believe it. The golden fruit of legend was real. Its radiant golden light illuminated the surroundings, exuding a mysterious divine aura. Exhausted from the long fight, he sat atop the corpse of the slain divine dragon, his eyes fixed on the glowing fruit. After catching his breath, he slowly stood and approached the tree. Confidence filled his chest. With this fruit, he believed, he could finally reach the peak of martial arts that he had dreamed of all his life. Without hesitation, he plucked the golden fruit and began to eat it. The moment he swallowed, a strange and powerful energy surged through his body. His veins throbbed, his blood boiled, and his entire being trembled as if being reforged by divine power. It was then revealed that this man's name was Gilphus L. Dragon, the one hailed as the strongest human in the entire world. But decades later, Gilphus L. Dragon had grown old. Now lying weakly on his bed, he was surrounded by his children and grandchildren. They whispered that his time was near and that they must accept that he would soon pass away. His eldest son, Gilliam, held his father's hand tightly. Gilphus, the current head of the L. Dragon family, told his son that he didn't want to see sadness on their faces, that his time had simply come. Gilliam forced a smile, his voice trembling as he said that the manor had already grown gloomy when their mother passed away, and it would be even lonelier once their father was gone. But Gilphus gently reminded him not to let weakness consume him, not to be swallowed by grief. Then, as silence filled the room, Gilphus thought back to the golden fruit. He admitted to himself that in the end, perhaps no one could truly believe in the myths of the ancient world. Yet he still felt fortunate, for he had lived long enough to have a family of his own. He told his loved ones that he had lived a long and fulfilling life, and that he had no regrets, but deep inside he knew it was a lie. Even now, he still couldn't let go of his dream. If only he had more time, he would continue to pursue the peak of martial arts, the dream that had eluded him all his life. And so, in his final moments, he held onto that desire until his last breath. However, in a completely unexpected twist, Gilphus opened his eyes once again. Confused, he wondered if he had merely fallen asleep. Everything felt strange. His room was different. His body felt light, and his surroundings unfamiliar. When he finally looked at his hands, his eyes widened in disbelief. "These aren't my hands. Am I a baby?" He quickly realized he was in a bizarre situation. But as a 10-star level martial artist, he questioned how anyone could have done this to him without him noticing. Then, a thought struck him. The divine dragon and the golden fruit. He finally understood. The fruit's effect wasn't immortality, but reincarnation. Though unexpected, the realization filled him with joy. He had been granted another chance, a second life, to reach the peak he failed to attain before. Soon he noticed he wasn't alone in the room. When he looked around, he realized he was inside the annex of the L Dragon Manor. Somehow, he had been reborn into the same family. He then noticed that the room was filled with other infants. Just as he was wondering why there were so many babies here, a group of maids entered, carrying baby bottles. But strangely, instead of milk, they carried a red liquid. Gilphus watched as the maids poured the crimson substance into the bottles. He thought they were about to feed the infants, but suddenly, one of the maids carried out a goblin. They forced the bottle into the goblin's mouth. Moments later, the goblin began to tremble violently. A red light burst from its body, and then it exploded into a shower of blood, splattering across the room. Gilphus froze in shock. Fear and confusion filled his mind. What in the world is happening here? One of the maids calmly said that the mixture would be safe if they adjusted the right amount of water. As they began feeding the red liquid to the other infants, another maid picked up Gilphus himself. He looked at the bottle and immediately realized it wasn't milk. The energy coming from it was terrifyingly strong. He could sense that the liquid was dragon blood, and that it was far too dangerous for a newborn's fragile body. But before he could react, the maid pushed the bottle into his mouth. Instinctively, like any infant, he began to drink. Instantly, immense power surged through his veins. His small body trembled from the pain, but Gilphus recognized it. The blood of ancient dragons was coursing through him. He thought, "This is dangerous, but maybe this is also an opportunity." At first, he considered stopping, but then he realized, if he could absorb this power, He might surpass even his former self. He might finally reach the true summit of martial arts. With fierce determination, he continued drinking the dragon's blood. His veins bulged, his body convulsed in agony, but his will remained unbroken. "Don't underestimate me," he thought. "I am Gilfus Eldragon." He repeated the words in his mind like a mantra, enduring the pain until miraculously, he overcame it. The maid stared in disbelief as he continued to drink, surviving what should have been a death sentence. Within his tiny body, two colossal dragon energies clashed violently, battling for dominance. When one finally overpowered the other, Gilfus could hardly believe how easily he had absorbed the power. When the two dragon forces finally merged within him, he realized this was the perfect opportunity. After finishing the last drop, he couldn't believe he had survived the overwhelming pain. His body hadn't exploded. Instead, it had adapted. He noticed a few other infants had also survived, which made him smirk inwardly. So, he thought, never underestimate the survival instincts of a newborn. But as expected from a baby's body, exhaustion soon overcame him. His eyelids grew heavy, and despite his triumph, Gilfus Eldragon, the strongest human reborn, slowly drifted into sleep. After 7 years, he was now undergoing intense physical training. While doing one-handed push-ups, a massive boulder was balanced on his feet. When he finally reached his 1,000th count, he kicked the boulder upward, and as it came crashing down onto his back, Gilfus couldn't believe the strength his body now possessed. Gilfus Eldragon, the former family head of the Eldragon clan, now lived under a new name, Zeke Eldragon. Zeke thought about how he had achieved such physical power at a young age, realizing it was all thanks to the ancient dragon blood flowing in his veins. It was said that every being in this world possessed something called a source of power, but the ancient dragon blood that had been given to them as infants contained a tremendous amount of that power. Those who survived drinking it developed bodies far stronger than ordinary humans. With the divine dragon source of power within him, Zeke knew he had already surpassed the limits he reached at the same age in his past life. And since he was the only infant who had managed to drink an entire bottle of ancient dragon blood, his body underwent a drastic transformation, one even he did not expect. Yet despite his progress, what frustrated him most was that he remained a mere 1 star. He had trained relentlessly, expecting to reach at least 4 stars by now. The star was the measure of one's source power. In this world, the human body was said to resemble a universe. The more stars one had floating within that inner universe, the stronger they became. However, as the number of stars increased, so too did the difficulty of reaching the next level. In his past life as Gilfus Eldragon, Zeke had achieved the unimaginable, 10 stars. He was the only person in the world to ever reach such a level. "Time really flies," Zeke muttered. He was now 7 years old. We learned that he was an illegitimate child of the current Eldragon family head. His mother had died when he was still an infant, and to this day he had never even seen his father's face, something he considered deeply irresponsible. What shocked him most was the realization that 1,000 years had already passed since his reincarnation. He thought that reincarnation itself was already unbelievable. But after 1,000 years, the world had changed. It had become a true survival of the fittest era. The greatest proof of this was the practice of feeding infants the blood of ancient dragons, followed by a ritual known as the Dragon Trial. Only those who survived both the drinking of dragon blood and the Dragon Trial were deemed worthy to receive education and training as Eldragon warriors. Naturally, Zeke should have been one of them. Yet, whenever he asked the servant assigned to take care of him why no instructor had ever been sent to train him, the servant would only say that he wasn't allowed to answer such questions. Even after turning 7, Zeke had never received a single lesson. "Isn't that strange?" Zeke wondered aloud. Every child who survived the Dragon Trial was supposed to begin combat training. Everyone except him. Day after day, he lived alone with only a servant by his side. When he confronted the servant about it, the servant merely asked what was wrong with that arrangement. Zeke sighed and said that for now, conditioning his body was more important than combat training anyway. After all, he could teach himself if he wanted to. He had once been a 10-star warrior in his past life. Zeke then requested information about the other surviving infants or anything about the main family that could help him. But once again, the servant refused, saying she wasn't permitted to disclose such information. Frustration clouded Zeke's face. "Will you always refuse to answer me?" he asked sharply. The servant's firm and repeated that she couldn't speak of such matters. "Isn't it cruel?" Zeke asked bitterly. "Treating me like this?" But the servant explained that he was only following orders, her duty being to attend to Zeke's daily needs, nothing more. The servant, a 3-star level practitioner, could have easily taught Zeke basic combat techniques. Yet Zeke had no interest in such trivial lessons. After 7 years of living with this maid, he had grown used to the same lifeless responses. Finally, Zeke decided to leave and head into the forest. The servant said nothing, merely watching as Zeke walked away. So, she's really going to let me go? Zeke thought, a hint of irritation in his tone. Deep in the forest, Zeke uprooted wild poisonous herbs and ate them without hesitation. As before, the taste was vile, but this was part of his training method. Then suddenly he noticed something. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm as he repeated to himself, "Be patient, be patient." He could feel someone, or something, watching him from afar, observing his every move. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the presence. After a few moments, Zeke sighed. "They followed me all the way here, huh?" When he could no longer stand it, he called out, "You might as well come out if you've got something to say." Then he moved into the tall grass, hiding himself. Moments later, while crouched in the grass, Zeke sensed a dark, oppressive aura nearby. When he looked toward the source, he saw a creature known as an anger boar. What is that aura? He wondered. The black mist surrounding the beast was something he had never seen before, not even 1,000 years ago. As the anger boar grazed on the grass, Zeke suddenly stood and revealed himself, startling the beast. It charged at him immediately, and rather than fear, a smile formed on Zeke's face. He was genuinely thrilled to fight it. The boar lunged forward, but Zeke swiftly dodged, gathering golden energy into his fist. With a powerful strike, he unleashed an explosion that tore through the anger boar's body. He couldn't help but grin at the sight. His attack had been far stronger than he expected. Even as a 1-star, his power surpassed that of most practitioners at the same level. Hoisting the slain creature over his shoulder, Zeke muttered, "It'll be even better once I raise my star level." He was tired of 7 years of being ignored and isolated by the Eldragon family. He wondered if it was time to leave and travel on his own, maybe even venture toward the ocean. Meanwhile, in the distance, a cloaked man watched from the shadows. "What's going on with that boy?" he muttered. Even without formal training, he's reached 1-star level, and he killed that anger boar with a single strike. What puzzled the man even more was how Zeke managed to sense his presence. "That child isn't ordinary," he said quietly. He recalled that Zeke's mother had died young, and his father, the current family head, had shown no interest in him. Without proper guidance, the boy shouldn't have grown this strong. Still, as the son, illegitimate or not, of the Eldragon head, Zeke was bound to remain under the clan's watch. That was why someone like him had been assigned to monitor the boy from the shadows. An illegitimate son, yet the blood of the family head runs through his veins, the man whispered. Could that be why he's so strong? Uncertain, he chuckled softly. That kid will be interesting to watch in the future. Then, he disappeared into the darkness. Back at Zeke's home, the boy was packing his belongings, ready to set off on his journey. But suddenly, he sensed several powerful presences outside. 3 4-star practitioners and 1 5-star. What are they doing here? He thought, stepping quietly to the door to listen. From their conversation, he heard them talking about how fresh and clean the air was in such a remote place, and how peaceful it was since there were no nearby rifts. Hearing this, Zeke concluded that they weren't assassins. They didn't sound like bad people at all. Deciding to confront them directly, he opened his door and asked, "What business do you have here?" The group froze in surprise. Then Zeke noticed the emblem embroidered on their clothing, the mark of the Eldragon clan. "Eldragon?" he muttered under his breath, wondering what they wanted from him. The men quickly bowed. "It's an honor to finally meet you, young Master Zeke," their leader said. "We've been sent to escort you to the site of your examination." "Examination?" Zeke frowned in confusion. Annoyance flickered across his face. "They expect me to take an exam," he muttered, "even though they haven't taught me a damn thing yet." And after a few days, Zeke could hardly believe that he had returned once again to the main estate of the Eldragon family. He told us that he wasn't brought here to live again within the main estate, but rather for another purpose. Before he could enter, they instructed him to change out of his dirty clothes first. Zeke then began to explain about something known as the Dragon's Nest. After 1,000 years, the Eldragon family had established a school that served all branches of their bloodline. Everyone born with any relation or connection to the Eldragon family dreamed of entering this so-called Dragon's Nest to receive proper education once they turned 7 years old. And today marked the day of the entrance ceremony for that academy. Zeke was here to take part in the entrance exam. Even though he hadn't learned anything about the modern generation of his family, taking the exam was mandatory. Zeke immediately felt disheartened when he realized that this was the true reason they had brought him here. Why now, he thought, when he had already decided to leave and travel the world? While sitting by the school gate, a boy from Ortiscale village approached him. It was Rangus, who asked if he was all right and what seemed to be bothering him. When Zeke asked who he was, the boy formally introduced himself as Rangus and said he had approached because Zeke looked troubled. "Is that so?" Zeke replied casually. After observing the flow of energy in Rangus's body, Zeke quietly thought to himself that the boy seemed shy, but had an unusually strong sense of perception. Zeke then apologized for his situation, introducing himself in return, and admitting that his mind was in turmoil because he had no idea what they would be required to do in the exam. "Is that all?" said Rangus, feeling slightly nervous at the mention of the test. Still, he explained that the annual entrance exam for the Dragon's Nest didn't really change much. But when Zeke admitted he knew nothing about the exam, Rangus was shocked. Taking the test without any knowledge at all. Wasn't that far too reckless and dangerous? Just as Rangus was about to explain the details of the exam, a loud and arrogant voice suddenly interrupted them. A boastful boy shouted and called Rangus a weakling. Rangus turned around in shock and immediately recognized who it was. It was Retin, also from Ortiscale Village. Mocking him, Retin asked why he was here, suggesting that he must have gotten lost to end up at the Dragon's Nest. He even told him it would be better to go home before he got hurt. "I'm here to take the entrance exam," Rangus replied, though his voice trembled as Retin drew closer, asking if he was seriously going to take the test. Retin clutched his stomach and burst out laughing, saying it was impossible for him to pass. He even insulted Rangus's father, saying, "Your father's a pseudo-dragon, right? What could the son of a pseudo-dragon possibly accomplish?" Rangus's fists trembled as he held back his anger. But Zeke noticed everything. Then it was explained to us that the Eldragon family followed an absolute hierarchy. The ranks were as follows: novice whelp dragons, regular soldier child dragons, captain-level adult dragons, executive elder dragons, also known as elders, and at the very bottom were the pseudo-dragons. Those who had failed to enter or graduate from the Dragon's Nest, considered immature and incomplete dragons. Yet Rangus had long dreamed of proving that even if they were called pseudo-dragons, they were still dragons nonetheless. Zeke was surprised and asked why Retin was so sure Rangus would fail the exam even before it started. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Retin snapped, asking if Zeke had a problem with him. Zeke calmly said he was merely curious why Retin was so confident Rangus couldn't pass. Retin pointed at Rangus and shouted that the reason was obvious. He was just a weakling. Zeke tilted his head and asked if he really said Rangus was weak, because from what he could sense, Rangus seemed even stronger than them. Hearing that, Rangus's eyes widened in disbelief. It was the first time someone had stood up for him. The arrogant boys grew angry and asked if Zeke was seriously claiming they were weaker than a pseudo-dragon, a being they saw as inferior. But before things could escalate, a man arrived and drew everyone's attention. He was the adult dragon examiner, announcing that the Dragon's Nest entrance exam was about to begin, and that all participants should register to receive their numbers. As Retin left, he glared at Zeke and warned that he wouldn't forget his face. Zeke sighed and said there was no need for anger, remarking that the children of this generation seemed to have such short tempers. Rangus quickly replied that wasn't that strange, since they were about the same age. Rangus added that anyone would be angry if told they were weaker than him. "Is that so?" Zeke muttered lightly. Since the entrance exam was mandatory, they had no choice but to take it. Though Zeke was surprised when Rangus said it was actually possible to skip the test. Zeke's eyes widened, and Rangus realized Zeke truly didn't know anything about it. Rangus advised him that it might be better to withdraw now before he got hurt. But Zeke replied confidently that a genius like him would never withdraw from a challenge. Rangus could only shake his head and say that Zeke was overly confident despite knowing nothing about the exam. Zeke simply laughed and said that whatever the test may be, they should hurry since it was about to start. Rangus had no choice but to agree. When they arrived at the testing grounds, the examiner announced that the exam was simple. To pass, they only needed to scratch the stones placed behind him. However, no other weapons were allowed except those provided by the academy. Still, they were free to use their bare hands if they wished, but each participant only had 3 attempts. "That's it?" Zeke said, sounding unimpressed. After surviving the dragon trial when they were still infants, he expected something far more terrifying and intense. But this seemed disappointingly simple. The examiner then called the first participant and instructed him to begin. The boy, nervous but determined, struck the massive stone with all his strength. The sound of metal clashing against rock echoed loudly, ringing in their ears. But to everyone's shock, the boy's sword snapped in half, and the recoil shattered his arm. Zeke was stunned at what he saw. As the boy writhed in pain, the examiner calmly said that he still had 2 remaining attempts, and asked if he wished to continue. But since the boy could no longer stand, the examiner declared him failed and ordered the others to clean up the area. As the injured participant was dragged away, The next number was called. Rangus trembled in fear at what he witnessed, while Zeke grew annoyed. "So this is what they call an exam?" he muttered. He then asked what kind of stones they were using. It was explained that the stones possessed regenerative properties. Any scratches would vanish in an instant. Moreover, they could reflect physical force 100-fold when struck with power. Zeke immediately said that such materials were far too excessive for an entrance exam. But Rangus explained that it was still possible to scratch them if one could properly circulate their source power throughout their entire body before attacking. "I see," Zeke said. He realized that the circulation of source power was far more important than martial arts skills in this exam. After glancing at the other participants, he thought that only a few would be able to pass, including those arrogant boys. As the exam continued, more and more failed than passed. Many were injured badly due to the stone's ability to reflect ordinary physical attacks. Then, after a few moments, the examiner called out Zeke's number. "It's my turn," Zeke said with a calm smile. Rangus, still nervous, asked if he really had no intention of withdrawing. But Zeke simply walked forward, telling him not to worry. As he approached the examiner, the man's eyes widened in shock. Zeke's aura began to flare up, faintly revealing the might from his previous life as Gilphus. The examiner told him to step forward and choose a weapon, but Zeke said it wasn't necessary. His fists alone would be enough. The crowd murmured in disbelief. No matter how skilled he might be in circulating source power, they thought, there was no way he could scratch the stone with his bare hands. His fists would surely shatter instead. Some of them said that not only Zeke's fists, but also his arms would be destroyed, which made Rangus extremely nervous for him. Along with his fear came anger toward himself, thinking he should have forcibly stopped Zeke to prevent him from getting hurt. The examiner then gave the signal to begin. As Zeke approached the massive stone, he placed his hand on it, noting that this was the first time he had ever seen such a material. He thought to himself that it must have been formed over 1,000 years ago. And even now, there were still many things about the current generation that he didn't fully understand. But that didn't matter anymore. He immediately gathered his source power into his fist. While Rangus trembled with anxiety about what might happen to Zeke, our protagonist was actually filled with excitement, because for the first time, he could use his full strength. He decided to use the mysterious stone to measure his current power. Rangus's eyes widened once more as Zeke unleashed the first form of the Dragon Destruction combat technique, Burst Strike, against the stone. A tremendous surge of energy erupted from the impact. Fragments of the shattered rock flew everywhere, and the violent wind from the blast sent dust and debris swirling through the air. In awe yet on guard, Rangus quickly shielded himself from the aftermath, while the examiner's eyes widened in disbelief at what he had just witnessed. As the dust began to settle, Zeke stood there with a smile on his face, remarking that the technique he used still seemed too much for his current strength. Despite the severe injuries to his hand, he laughed at himself, realizing he still needed much more intense training. The other participants were speechless at what they had seen. Retin looked both shocked and annoyed that Zeke had destroyed the enchanted stone. A woman watching commented that Zeke was truly interesting. While the others still couldn't get over what had happened, Zeke waited happily for the examiner to announce the results. But the examiner was still in shock. The stone Zeke had destroyed was known to regenerate itself, and the only ones capable of breaking it were supposed to be those who had already reached the 4-star level or higher. Yet now, a mere child stood before him, having done what seemed impossible. "He's just an illegitimate son," the examiner muttered to himself, then wondered if Zeke's ability came from the blood of the family head that still flowed within him. He also realized that the technique Zeke used seemed strangely familiar. Still dazed, the examiner didn't respond right away, so Zeke called out to him impatiently, asking for the result. Snapping back to his senses, the examiner finally declared that Zeke had passed the test. One of the examiners then handed Zeke a small bottle containing a green liquid. Curious, Zeke asked what it was, but the man only asked if he could leave already since Zeke was blocking the area. Annoyed, Zeke frowned and muttered if everyone in this generation was this rude. Before he could complain further, Rangus ran up to him with excitement, praising Zeke's performance. Zeke proudly grinned and said it was nothing but peanuts. Zeke then asked what the liquid was, and Rangus explained that it was a healing potion, the standard potion of the Eldragon family. "Healing potion?" Zeke repeated. Rangus confirmed it, but since Zeke was an illegitimate son of the family, he suspected it might be poison. However, since Rangus had vouched for it, he wondered if it might actually be a spiritual medicine. The elixir, known as Cloud-Piercing Clarity Wood, was made from extremely rare materials, herbs found only in secret realms, along with the pure source power of divine beasts and the essence of elusive phantom beasts. When used, it could heal not only fresh wounds but also old scars and injuries. On top of that, it could enhance one's source power. Because the ingredients were so rare and the process so complex, such elixirs were rarely seen. After drinking it, Zeke was amazed by its immediate effect on his body. "Is this really a spirit medicine?" he asked Rangus. Rangus replied that he didn't know what spirit medicine meant, but he was certain that the Eldragon family's potions were of far higher quality than any commercial ones outside their domain. Rangus then asked if the potion's effect surprised Zeke that much. "Of course," Zeke said, explaining that it healed both his serious injuries and the strain from his training. Still, he noticed that unlike spirit medicine, it didn't seem to boost his source power. Rangus, on the other hand, said he was even more amazed by Zeke himself, to which Zeke chuckled and told him not to joke. Zeke thought to himself that the potion's existence showed how far knowledge had advanced over the last 1,000 years. Rangus praised Zeke's strength again, and Zeke declared that his dream was to become the strongest of all. Soon, the examiner announced that Retin had also passed the test, as well as his companions. Zeke expected as much, but then Rangus trembled nervously when his number was called. Despite his fear, he gathered his courage and walked to the front. Watching his stiff movements, Zeke wondered why Rangus was so nervous, then shouted to encourage him, telling him to trust himself. Embarrassed, Rangus asked him to lower his voice. When Rangus chose a sword as his weapon, Zeke watched closely, wondering what he was doing. Once the examiner gave the signal, Rangus attacked the stone, but as he expected, he failed on his first try. Determined, he stood again for another attempt, but his strike bounced off the stone, causing him to lose his balance and fall. His hands trembled from the stone's reflective ability. Retin and his group burst into laughter, saying it was just as they expected. The son of a pseudo-dragon was nothing more than a pseudo-dragon himself. They mocked him, telling him to give up. Retin even sneered at Zeke, asking if this was the same man he claimed could pass, and if Rangus was truly stronger than them. Zeke stayed silent for a moment, then told them to stop spouting nonsense. The examiner informed Rangus that he only had one attempt left, and asked if he still wanted to continue. Rangus couldn't answer. Overwhelmed by embarrassment and the ridicule of others, he lowered his head. But then Zeke walked up to him and asked what he was doing. He questioned why Rangus was using a sword instead of a spear, why he would choose a weapon that didn't suit him, and why he would take a test without any plan at all. Retin watched mockingly as Zeke told Rangus that in his current condition, he wouldn't even scratch the stone no matter how many times he tried. Retin and his group laughed again, calling Zeke an idiot, reminding him that Rangus knew nothing about using a spear. His weak father only ever taught him swordsmanship, they said, and switching weapons now wouldn't change the outcome. But Zeke ignored their jeers and called out to the examiner, asking if it was against the rules to change weapons. The examiner said it wasn't. "Then Rangus is lucky," Zeke said with a grin. He turned to Rangus and asked if he trusted him. Memories of all the humiliation he and his father had suffered flashed through Rangus's mind. Gritting his teeth, he stood tall and said he would trust Zeke. He would fight with a spear just as Zeke told him to. Rangus told us that his father never managed to enter the dragon's nest. Because of that, people called him a pseudo-dragon and laughed at him. But despite all the humiliation, his father endured everything just to raise Rangus properly. That's why Rangus swore to prove to everyone that he, Rangus, the son raised with care by his father, is also a true dragon. He stood up once more, gripping the spear tightly in his hands, and declared that today, he would prove that neither he nor his father were fake dragons. He also realized that if he tried again with a sword, the result would only be the same as before. So this time he decided to trust Zeke completely. The only problem was that he didn't know how to use a spear. Zeke called out to him, and as he pointed toward the enchanted stone, he told Rangus that there was nothing else he needed to do. Just thrust the spear straight into the stone without thinking about anything else. "Just pierce it straight through," Zeke said firmly. Rangus tightened his grip on the spear. He knew that under normal circumstances, stabbing the stone directly wouldn't cause even the slightest damage, especially since it had a strong regeneration element. But Zeke was the first person to ever stand up for him, even though they had just met that very day. It was something new and unfamiliar to him, but because of that, he chose to place his full trust in Zeke and believe in his own strength this time. He gathered his source power into the spear and immediately noticed something strange. For years, he had wielded a sword, yet he had never managed to wrap it in this much source energy, something he was now effortlessly doing with the spear. With a determined shout, Rangus unleashed his full power and struck the stone with everything he had. Retin nearly died laughing, saying exactly what he had predicted, that changing weapons wouldn't help him pass the test. But Rangus didn't stop. He felt something different, something powerful. The spear in his hands felt like an extension of his own body. Then, as he drove the weapon forward with all his strength, The spear pierced through the enchanted stone completely. The shock on Retten's face and those of his companions was priceless. Even the examiners couldn't hide their astonishment, delighted by what they had just witnessed. Rangus hadn't just scratched the stone. He had pierced straight through it. Zeke immediately praised him, while Rangus himself could hardly believe what he'd done. Even after the examiner officially declared that he had passed, Rangus still asked in disbelief if he had really succeeded. Zeke smiled, wrapped an arm around his shoulder, and confirmed it. Overwhelmed with joy, Rangus nearly cried as he hugged Zeke tightly, shouting over and over that he had done it, that he had passed the test. Retten's group, however, refused to believe it. They called it luck, but Retten himself stayed silent, shaking with rage. He couldn't accept that. Just as Zeke had said, Rangus was actually stronger than them, and that his result was far better. The examiner then announced that the test had officially ended. Afterward, he declared that the entrance ceremony would begin shortly. Zeke immediately asked if the test was truly over. Rangus replied that it seemed so, but added that there would probably be more tests once they entered the dragon's nest. Soon, a group of men emerged from a dark hallway. When they stepped into the light, the examiner announced that the head of the Eldragon family would now deliver a speech to congratulate those who passed. The moment Zeke saw the man, he asked who the person with the cold, dark expression was. Rangus, clearly nervous, replied that it was the family head himself. "That's the family head?" Zeke said. "Why does he look like that? He's not even smiling. He looks colder than ice." Rangus immediately covered Zeke's mouth, whispering that it would be best if he stayed quiet, repeating his plea for him to stop talking. Zeke nodded. When he looked again at the group, he remarked that these people represented the current power of the Eldragon family. Some of them were at the 7-star level, while others were 6-star. To Zeke, their strength was impressive, especially since the current family head, Balza Eldragon, was an 8-star level powerhouse. 1,000 years ago, only a handful of people had ever reached that level. Still, Zeke wasn't sure how many existed in this current era. "I don't like this family head," Zeke muttered. But before he could say more, Rangus tried to hush him again. Zeke sighed and thought to himself that he never expected this man to be his father in this lifetime. A dark, fiery aura radiated from Balza's body, making the entire area feel heavy. The examiner quickly ordered everyone to stay silent because Master Balza was about to speak. When Balza stepped forward, he uttered only a few words. They must all strive to become the flesh and blood of the Eldragon family. As he spoke, the terrifying pressure of his aura spread across the hall. Zeke wasn't affected, but many of the examinees trembled in fear, some struggling to breathe as their bodies froze under the immense pressure. Zeke noticed that even Rangus was affected. He couldn't believe how easily everyone around him was overwhelmed by the family head's presence. More than that, Zeke could sense an intense hatred hidden within Balza's aura. He didn't know the reason behind it, but even so, he couldn't bring himself to like the man who was supposedly his father. When Balza turned away, another man stepped forward and drew everyone's attention. He had blonde hair and cheerfully thanked Balza for his words. He then said that Master Balza had high expectations for them all, and that just like his master, he would also keep his own speech short. As Zeke wondered who this man was, the speaker simply told everyone to train hard and grow stronger. "That's it?" one of the examiners muttered. The man smiled and said that people who worry too much about small things go bald early, so he wouldn't bother with long speeches. Zeke couldn't understand what was wrong with them, but at least the atmosphere in the hall had lightened up. The examiner then announced that the new students would now be assigned to their dormitories. Everyone whose number was called had to head there immediately. Zeke asked if they wouldn't all be staying in the same dormitory, and Rangus explained that there were 4 East, West, South, and North dorms. Every student accepted into the academy was allowed to live in one of those 4 halls. When Zeke's number was called, he stood up and waved goodbye to Rangus. He was assigned to the East Hall. As he walked through the corridor, he commented that a lot had changed in this place over the past 1,000 years. After finding his room, he said that he must have gotten lost since it took him a while to arrive, and his roommate had probably gotten there first. When he opened the door, he cheerfully greeted his new roommate and apologized for being late. He then said that from today on, they'd be sharing the same room. But to his surprise, his new roommate turned out to be none other than Rangus himself. Zeke couldn't help but laugh, saying it seemed like fate kept linking them together. He asked if there was anything else scheduled for the day, and Rangus confirmed that their training would start tomorrow. "Is that so?" Zeke said casually, prompting Rangus to ask if he hadn't listened to the examiner's earlier explanation. Zeke admitted that he hadn't, on purpose. Rangus sighed and said they should get some rest early, since training would begin the next day. As Zeke gazed out the window, he thought about his plan to escape from the Eldragon family and travel the world. But after what he'd learned about the enchanted stone with regenerative properties and the healing potion, he realized he had discovered many interesting things during the exam. If he truly wanted to understand all the changes that had taken place over the past 1,000 years, he thought, then maybe staying with the Eldragon family for a while wouldn't be such a bad idea after all. A month passed at the academy, and their training continued to grow harsher. Holding heavy dumbbells in both hands, the instructor explained that the dragon's breath he was teaching them was one of the most important techniques ever created by the 15th Eldragon family head. After reminding them that they had to master the technique under any condition, the instructor's attention was drawn to a few students. Some of them, he noticed, had already mastered dragon's breath, especially the young woman he called Master Lika. Her overflowing energy suggested that she was close to reaching the 2-star level. But aside from her, one other student caught his eye, and he could hardly believe what he was seeing. Zeke was training while not only holding the dumbbells but also balancing large stones on his head and arms. The instructor stared in disbelief and muttered to himself that the blood of the family head truly ran in Zeke's veins. However, it was said that no one had ever taught Zeke anything since he was a child, which is why everything he was witnessing now felt unfamiliar to him. Zeke, on the other hand, couldn't believe that the technique he once called the Dragon King's breathing technique had been further developed by the succeeding family heads, and that it was now being taught to other branches of the family as well. According to Zeke, breathing techniques were methods that gathered the source power from the surroundings into the body. Once circulated, this source power would strengthen a person's own inner energy. The effectiveness of such techniques depended on an individual's ability and intellect. That was why the great families of this world kept their techniques secret, never allowing them to be learned by outsiders or those not belonging to their bloodline. Zeke also realized that the dragon's breath was a safe and simple technique, easy enough to master, but it was useless to him if it could only be used while resting. His own version of the breathing technique allowed him to manipulate the surrounding source power even while moving. Because of that, it was far more complex and powerful in actual combat, but also much harder to learn. Only a few had ever mastered it. He thought the current generation must have simplified his original version, so that even the family's branch members could learn it, and that decision had clearly helped strengthen the Eldragon family. Zeke couldn't help but feel a strange satisfaction. He never imagined that the techniques he had discovered long ago would still have an impact after 1,000 years. It made him wonder if the other martial arts techniques he created had also evolved over time. Interesting, he muttered to himself, amused by the thought. Lika, meanwhile, quietly observed Zeke from a distance. Later, in the cafeteria, the other students were astonished by how much food Zeke was eating. As he continued devouring his meal, he noticed Rangus sitting silently across from him. "What's wrong?" Zeke asked. "You won't get strong if you don't eat." Rangus simply asked if Zeke didn't find his stamina strange. "That's it?" Zeke replied. "You just need to eat more if you want to get stronger. Train harder. Push yourself." He even offered some of his food to Rangus, but the latter politely declined, saying he'd had enough. As Zeke thought about how some of the students were already well trained even before entering the academy, a girl suddenly approached them. "You're quite impressive," Lika said, her tone calm yet confident. Zeke blinked. "And who are you supposed to be?" he asked casually. Rangus immediately choked on his food, whispering nervously, "You don't know who she is? That's Master Lika, the daughter of the family head, Lord Balza." "Oh," Zeke said indifferently. "What do you want me to do about that?" "I don't know her." Rangus began sweating profusely. "You can't talk like that. Master Lika is one of the candidates to become the next family head. She's not someone you can just speak to casually." "Is that so?" Zeke replied. "Well, I'm a family head's child too." "An illegitimate one, though?" Rangus froze in shock while Lika looked at him curiously. "Is that true?" she asked. "You're really the family head's illegitimate son?" The narrator's voice continued. Lika Typhona Eldragon, one of the candidates to inherit the Eldragon family, was now standing before Zeke herself. "Why would I lie about that?" Zeke said, shrugging. Lika frowned slightly. "Then tell me, how could an illegitimate child like you destroy the magic stone with your bare hands? How could someone not from a renowned family possess such strength?" "Because I'm Zeke," he replied confidently, turning back to Rangus. "Stop staring and finish your food." Both Lika and Rangus fell silent for a moment. Then, Lika suddenly smiled. "You really are an interesting person," she said before sitting down beside him. "How about serving under me? I'll make you one of my followers." Zeke raised an eyebrow. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "I want you to join me," she said. "Be my ally and I'll be your backer. Every illegitimate child needs allies and influence, don't they? Use your strength to help me become the next family head. And once I do, I'll help you achieve your own dreams. Zeke didn't even hesitate. No, he said flatly. Lika frowned again. Why not? Don't tell me you want to become the family head yourself? As her aura flared with a faint, crackling energy, Zeke could tell that she was close to reaching 2-star level. For someone her age to release an aura like that, she was indeed impressive. Still, Zeke remained calm. You can think and do whatever you want, he said. But I have no interest in being family head or any kind of title. Why? Lika asked coldly. Zeke stabbed his knife into the table. Because I don't need to serve anyone, he said, his voice steady but sharp. I'm the strongest person there is. The cafeteria went silent. Even Lika couldn't believe what she was feeling. Zeke's presence had completely overwhelmed her for a moment. Rangus immediately stepped in to diffuse the tension, urging both of them to calm down. But Lika wasn't the type to back off. Embarrassed and angered by what just happened, she decided to challenge Zeke to a duel. Zeke, however, didn't seem to care and simply continued eating. Moments later, a commotion spread across the campus. Where are they going? One student asked. To the training grounds, another replied. There's going to be a duel between the younger generation. Master Lika herself is fighting. What? Master Lika from the Typhona family? Someone exclaimed. Who's brave enough to challenge her? When they arrived at the training grounds, everyone whispered among themselves, wondering who would face her. Zeke, meanwhile, couldn't believe Lika was actually serious about the duel. Are you all right with this? Rangus asked nervously. You'll be fighting Master Lika. Even if you call her master, I don't know who she is, Zeke replied bluntly. Rangus sighed. You should at least show some respect, now that I know you're also the family head's son. Do what you want, Zeke said. Still, Rangus tried to explain. What's important now is that you understand who you're up against. Master Lika isn't just anyone. She's the daughter of Lord Balza Eldragon. And she also carries the blood of the Typhona family, one of the 4 great families supporting the Eldragons. She's a prodigy who mastered all forms of the Typhona family's hereditary lightning great sword technique at a young age. Like her father's other children, she has terrifying talent. Zeke tilted his head. I didn't understand a word of that except that she's the family head's daughter. Rangus stared at him. How do you not know any of this? Because I don't, Zeke said plainly. So don't ask me. Rangus blinked as Zeke suddenly laughed. But since I don't know anything about her, he said with a grin. That'll just make the fight more fun. Sounds exciting? Rangus could only sigh in worry. No matter how strong Zeke was, Master Lika was on another level entirely. Why did you even accept her challenge? He asked. I never run from a fight, Zeke answered. And it looks like my challenger's ready anyway. At that moment, Lika stood with her sword planted firmly in the ground. Her aura flared, lightning crackling faintly around her. Are you two done talking? She asked coldly. Lika shouted, asking if they were finally done talking, and Zeke replied that he was ready. Rangus, trembling in fear and shock, immediately ran away from them, warning Zeke to be careful in their fight. Zeke then turned to Lika and asked why she was so determined to fight him. Lika explained that she wanted to become the next family head of the Eldragon family, and to achieve that, she needed to defeat Zeke and make him one of her followers. What do you mean by that? Zeke asked, wondering what his connection was to her dream of becoming the family head. Lika questioned him back, asking if he truly had no idea about the current situation of their family, and whether being an illegitimate child was the reason he was so unaware. Zeke simply answered that he didn't, admitting that his knowledge about their family was limited. Because of that, Lika began explaining. She said that including both of them, there were 5 candidates to become the next family head. Except for Zeke, all of her siblings were connected to the 4 major branch families of the Eldragon clan. The position of family head was so important that it became a source of conflict among those branches. For that reason, all of Zeke's siblings had entered the Dragon's Nest to study and represent their respective families. Since the fight for succession had turned into a fierce competition, Lika needed strong allies to stand against her older brothers. Zeke quickly understood that this was a power struggle between the 4 main branches of the Eldragon family. He found it all too complicated, and wasn't even sure if he wanted to understand it. Lika then continued, saying that as one of the candidates for family head, she needed to strengthen not only her knowledge and power, but also her influence by gathering strong followers. Without another word, she charged straight towards Zeke, declaring that she would defeat him right then and there to make him one of her subordinates. But Zeke easily dodged her powerful strike, as well as the flurry of attacks that followed. Still, Lika refused to let him escape. The onlookers couldn't believe what they were seeing. The speed of their movements was incredible. Lika's attacks, despite her heavy greatsword, flowed so smoothly and rapidly that it seemed almost effortless. As they watched the battle between the siblings, The crowd began to murmur about Lika's precise control over her source power, noting how her strikes were becoming faster and stronger over time. They could only marvel at the power of a true daughter of the family head from one of the main branches. Some even said the fight's result was already obvious. What they didn't know, however, was that Lika herself was growing increasingly frustrated. She couldn't understand how Zeke kept dodging every single one of her attacks, or why it felt like he was simply toying with her. Rangjus, who was watching from a distance, couldn't help but be amazed, his earlier worries fading away as he saw Zeke's calm movements. Zeke then remarked that the martial arts Lika was using were unlike anything he had seen before. He admitted that her movements were far faster than those of any ordinary one-star level fighter. But Lika, irritated, shouted for him to stop talking and focus on their fight. Zeke clenched his fist and said he was already focused, and that was exactly why he could unleash such a powerful strike so easily. His punch landed squarely, and Lika immediately gagged from the force. She fell to her knees, gripping her sword and stomach in pain. The spectators gasped and began whispering among themselves, wondering how Zeke managed to avoid all of Lika's attacks and who this mysterious boy truly was. As Lika struggled to stand, she asked why none of her strikes could land. Compared to other one-star fighters, she knew she was much faster. So logically, Zeke shouldn't be able to keep up. Zeke admitted that she was indeed faster than any one-star he had ever seen. But in his eyes, she was still just a one-star. "You're a one-star too," Lika snapped, saying that Zeke shouldn't be able to match her speed and movements. "There's a simple reason for that," Zeke replied. "Your breathing, the movement of your eyes, even the shift of your muscles. I can read them all. By observing these small details, I can predict your next move. It's all based on experience." "Don't make me laugh," Lika shouted, launching another fast strike toward him. But Zeke easily dodged again, saying that just like his words a moment ago, he could see and read her every move. In the next instant, he countered with another powerful attack that sent Lika crashing into the wall with a violent force. The spectators screamed in shock, asking if Lika had really been defeated. "Master Zeke, that was amazing! You beat Master Lika!" Rangjus shouted in excitement, but Zeke calmly said that it wasn't over yet. Their fight wasn't finished. As the dust cleared, Lika stood once again, bruised but defiant. Zeke noted that she had focused her source power into her core, allowing her to endure his attack without suffering serious damage. He smiled slightly and admitted that Lika was truly an extraordinary girl. "That's enough, Master Lika," Rangjus pleaded. But Zeke told him to move back, warning that he could get caught in their next exchange. Zeke then noticed an intense surge of aura flowing from Lika. He wondered if she had just advanced to the 2-star level. The spectators noticed it too. They couldn't be mistaken. The glowing mark on her body was proof that she had indeed become a 2-star with a white aura. The 2-star level was a stage where one could channel source power into their martial arts, even manifesting it outside their body as aura. Lika thanked Zeke, saying that because of him, she had achieved the 2-star level earlier than expected. "But because of that," she declared, "you no longer have any chance of winning." With her aura blazing, she charged towards Zeke, her great sword surrounded by radiant power. Zeke only laughed. He looked genuinely thrilled. "You've really improved," he said with excitement, dodging another rapid strike. "Your speed is incredible now." But his expression suddenly changed when he felt a sting on his cheek, a shallow cut. "I know I dodged that attack," Zeke thought to himself. Lika smirked and asked if he could finally see the difference in their strength. "This is my true ability," she said proudly. "Now that I've become a full 2-star and gained my aura, I'll show you the real power of the true Thunder Greatsword technique." "Oh, then I get to witness a martial art I've never seen before," Zeke said, smiling in excitement. To him, this was turning out to be the most thrilling and enjoyable moment of their fight. Lika suddenly unleashed the Lightning Greatsword technique. Lightning flash, her sword crackling with blinding golden energy as she charged forward. Zeke was instantly enveloped in a storm of lightning, forcing him to retreat a step back as he shouted, "Wait a second!" What kind of technique was that? How can you manipulate lightning like that? Isn't this too much for a sparring match? Lika smirked, driving her sword into the ground as golden light surged around her. "You seem surprised," she said calmly. Summoning another move, Lightning Net, sparks erupted from the earth, forming a glowing web of electricity that shot towards Zeke, but he narrowly dodged it. As he landed, he muttered to himself, "Her power has grown tremendously. Her strength now is nothing like before. At this rate, this fight won't be easy." The audience murmured in awe, unable to hide their astonishment. Ever since Lika had advanced to 2-star level, the tide of the battle had completely turned. Rangjus, who had been watching anxiously, began to worry. Zeke noticed that Lika's movements were simple, nothing new compared to her 1-star self. but every swing of her blade now carried far greater force. Her lightning greatsword technique was overflowing with power, her aura amplifying each strike. What surprised Zeke even more was the speed. Lika was moving faster than he could have anticipated, and her lightning felt strangely mysterious. Still, he remained confident. Even if she could cloak herself in thunder, he was sure he could counter it. Yet, curiosity filled him. What kind of power was this? What kind of lightning could she command? While evading her continuous assaults, he studied her every move, analyzing her aura and its rhythm. Lika, noticing Zeke's calm smile as he danced away from her attacks, frowned. Still smiling? "You look too relaxed for someone in a duel," she sneered. "Let's see how long that lasts." She dashed forward once more, her sword blazing with light as she used swift thunder, enveloping herself in golden lightning. But again, Zeke evaded at the last moment. She's as fast as lightning itself, he thought, only for Lika to swing her sword mid-charge. The blow struck true this time, sending Zeke flying backward with a powerful shockwave that scattered dust and debris across the field. Rangus gasped and rushed towards Zeke out of sheer panic, but one of the spectators grabbed his arm to stop him. Meanwhile, Zeke stood up, his clothes scorched but his will unshaken. Lika charged again, unleashing another lightning flash, striking him head-on. Yet Zeke still stood tall afterward. How is he still standing? Lika muttered, her brow furrowed in disbelief. Rangus ran toward them, shouting, "Master Lika, stop!" "That's enough. We've already seen your strength." But Lika snapped back coldly. "Do you not understand, Rangus? Stopping mid-battle would be an insult to Zeke." Desperate, Rangus turned to Zeke and begged, "Please, Master Zeke, surrender." "That's enough." Lika chuckled. "He's right. Judging by your condition, surrendering would be wise. If you kneel and pledge loyalty to me, I'll stop." But Zeke only smiled silently. Lika's eyes hardened. "Even as an illegitimate child, you're truly a proud Eldragon," she said with a hint of mockery. She raised her greatsword high, her aura surging. "If that's what you want, then I'll use my full strength to end this." Lightning roared from the heavens as Lika summoned her first secret art, Heaven's Thunder. A colossal surge of golden energy descended, shattering the stones beneath Zeke's feet. Thunderbolts struck his body in a storm of divine fury. Rangus cried out in terror, watching his friend's body engulfed by golden lightning, smoke rising from his charred form. Lika drove her sword into the ground, exhaled deeply, and said softly, "I'm sorry, Zeke, but this is the end." But then, a voice echoed through the crackling air. "Is that so?" In an instant, a brilliant golden lightning aura exploded skyward. Lika's eyes widened in shock as she turned around. "Impossible. How can this be? How do you have a lightning aura?" she stammered. Zeke stood, smiling calmly as golden arcs danced across his skin. "So this is what you call lightning aura," he said casually. "If you're asking how I got it, I honestly don't know." His tone was calm, but his words sent ripples through the crowd. "Impossible," Lika whispered, unable to believe what she was seeing. Zeke smirked. "Truth is, I let you hit me on purpose. I wanted to study your lightning, how it flows, how it behaves. And somehow I learned to use it myself." "That's absurd," Lika snapped. Inwardly, Zeke explained to himself that he had deliberately taken Lika's attacks because her lightning intrigued him. While enduring her strikes, he continuously activated his Dragon King's breath technique. The strange resonance between his breathing and her lightning caused golden energy to gather in his body. Before he knew it, he could manipulate the lightning himself. Maybe Lika has a unique constitution, he thought. And judging from her family's great sword technique, it's likely their whole bloodline shares this lightning affinity. Zeke walked toward her confidently. "I never expected lightning-type source power to be this incredible." This duel turned out to be the perfect training. With a grin, he added, "Thanks to you, Lika. I've reached 2-star level myself." Golden lightning flared around him as he declared, "Our battle isn't over yet." Lika roared and charged again, her greatsword glowing with power, unleashing another blinding attack. But Zeke sidestepped effortlessly and prepared a counterstrike. However, as he moved, he suddenly vanished in a flash and reappeared on the opposite end of the arena. "What just happened?" he muttered. He then realized, when one gains immense source power, it strengthens the body's muscles and nerves. This new lightning aura must have changed my physiology. I can't fully control my speed yet. In the stands, Rangus was speechless. He couldn't follow their movements anymore. Both fighters were blurs of golden light and thunder. Am I just imagining things? Or has Lika not landed a single hit lately? He wondered. Frustrated, Lika shouted, "Are you mocking me, Zeke? Stop toying with me." "I'm not," Zeke replied calmly. "But I will admit, you're a real threat." He then lunged forward, delivering a powerful kick, but Lika blocked it with her sword, the force pushing her backward. Zeke straightened, smirking. I think it's time to end this. End this? Lika repeated, narrowing her eyes. Yes, Zeke replied. I've been thinking of creating a new technique for a while now, and this seems like the perfect time. Creating a new technique? She said in disbelief. Zeke nodded. Exactly. He paused for a moment, then murmured, should I call it a first form, or maybe a special form? Lika blinked, confused. Did he even receive proper combat training? From which family could he have learned that? She wondered, her thoughts spinning. Before she could react, Zeke appeared beside her in a flash, lightning surging in his hand. Dragon Destruction Combat Arts, Special Form, Lightning Peak, he shouted. The attack struck her directly, wrapping her in a fierce storm of golden thunder. Her body trembled violently, her sword slipping from her grasp as she fell to her knees before him, electricity still crackling around her. The arena fell silent. Rangus and the others stared in disbelief. Zeke had won. Lika, lying on the ground, exhaled shakily. After a few moments, she forced herself to sit up, trembling. I can't believe I lost. I was supposed to become the next family head. I can't lose. Not to anyone, she thought bitterly. Zeke approached her, offering his hand. You were amazing, Lika. Truly strong, he said sincerely. It's always exciting to learn something new. This fight was worth it. Smiling warmly, he added, it'd be boring if this was the last time we fought. Let's have another sparring match sometime. Lika froze, her cheeks turning red as she stared at his outstretched hand. Despite her defeat, she had a feint of happiness on her face. Perhaps out of pride, or perhaps for the first time, admiration. Once again, Zeke said that they should have another sparring match soon. With a confident smile, he added that he couldn't wait for their next bout. Lika, though a bit shy, extended her hand toward him, admitting that she was no match for him, and that she willingly accepted her defeat. Meanwhile, several hours later, deep inside a dimensional rift, Balza Eldragon, the father of Lika and Zeke, and the current head of the Eldragon family, stood surrounded by countless strange and feral monsters. As the creatures charged toward him, Balza's eyes began to glow with an intense light. Releasing a crushing wave of aura and dragon pressure, he instantly froze every creature in place. Drawing his sword, Balza invoked the first form, Genesis, of the Dragon Destruction Combat Arts. With a single, fluid swing, all the monsters around him were cleaved cleanly in half. As he sheathed his sword, the Eldragon family soldiers rushed forward to finish off any remaining monsters that might have survived their master's strike. Balza turned toward the exit of the rift, but before he could leave, one of the soldiers called out to him, saying that he had an important report. Balza stopped walking and asked what it was about. The soldier informed him that Lady Lika had reached the 2-star level. Upon hearing this, Balza froze mid-step. His glowing eyes flickered, and his response came out cold and detached. So what of it? The soldier, clearly nervous, explained that reaching the 2-star level at only 7 years old was an extraordinary achievement. He added that with Lika's talent, once she graduated from Dragon's Nest, she would likely reach the 4-star level, or perhaps even the 5-star level. Balza's reply was chilling. Talent means nothing. The next time you report to me, I expect to hear how she can be of use to us. If all you bring are worthless updates like this, you'd better leave my sight. The soldier fell silent as Balza continued toward the rift's exit. But before he could step through, the soldier quickly added that Lika had recently lost in a sparring match. Balza stopped abruptly and turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Did she lose to one of her brothers? He asked. The soldier shook his head. No, master. She was defeated by someone her own age. By Lord Zeke. Zeke? Balza repeated, his voice low. The son of that woman? Memories surfaced, of a humble maid, Zeke's mother. That woman truly was gifted in battle, he muttered. But she died after giving birth to the boy. He turned fully to face the soldier, his tone sharp. Tell me, who could have possibly trained Zeke to defeat a 2-star cultivator? The soldier hesitated before answering. No one, master. Lord Zeke has never received formal training. He defeated Lady Lika through his own strength and skill alone. In fact, he too has already reached the 2-star level. I see, Balza said flatly. Then, turning his back once more, he declared, Begin the first trial. The soldier was visibly startled. Master Balza, forgive my intrusion, but isn't it too soon for the first trial? It's only been a month since the students began their combat training. Most of them haven't even reached the 1-star level yet. Balza cut him off. I do not care. Death chooses no timing, no level, no favorites. Only the strong deserve to survive. Star levels mean nothing if they can't endure the first trial. Those who fail aren't worthy of the Eldragon name. Yes, master, the soldier replied quickly. But then Balza added, Also, summon Freya. Tell her to return immediately. The soldier's eyes widened in disbelief. Freya. Master, do you mean that Freya? Balza nodded. Indeed. If Zeke could defeat Lika using only his own strength, then he's far more intriguing than I expected. I want Freya to design and supervise the first trial herself, and I expect her to personally observe every participant. The soldier bowed deeply. As you command, Master Balza. For the first time in a long while, a faint smile appeared on Balza's lips. A rare, almost warm expression flickered across his face as he said softly, "He's the most interesting one of all." The next day at Dragon's Nest, the students continued their combat training under Rangus. Zeke, however, was off to the side, practicing his breathing technique. Sitting in a wall-sit position, he balanced a massive boulder on his head while holding dumbbells in both hands. His unwavering focus drew the attention of Rangus and the others, who couldn't help but watch him in silence. With his eyes closed, Zeke contemplated the technique they were studying, the Strike Dragon combat arts. As he recalled, this technique was originally created by the 15th family head. Though labeled as a combat art, it was in truth a body enhancement method, simple yet well constructed, allowing even young cultivators to grasp it. Rangus called out, "Zeke, aren't you going to train?" Zeke opened one eye. "What do you mean?" "I mean combat training," Rangus clarified. "We're practicing the Strike Dragon combat arts." "I already learned that," Zeke replied casually. Rangus was stunned. "What? But it was only taught to us this morning. How could you have mastered it already?" "Because I'm me," Zeke said with a smirk. "But what's more important right now is that your source power is flowing incorrectly." "My what?" Rangus asked, confused. Zeke set down the heavy boulder from his head and told Rangus to turn around. Placing his hand on Rangus' back, Zeke channeled his aura through Rangus's body, correcting the flow of energy. "There," he said. "That's how your aura should circulate." Rangus turned to face him, grateful. "You've really mastered the Strike Dragon combat arts, haven't you?" "That's incredible!" Zeke frowned playfully. "Are you doubting me? What kind of friend are you?" "No, not at all," Rangus quickly said. "It's just, aside from my father, no one's ever taught me like that before. That's why I want to learn everything I can. You, Lord Zeke, already have your own martial arts, strong enough to defeat Lady Lika. I just thought the Strike Dragon combat arts might be too simple and boring for someone like you." "It's not boring," Zeke replied. "Actually, I admire its stability. It reminds me of my own dragon destruction combat arts, though my children never liked that technique. They said it was too difficult and complicated." The dragon destruction combat arts was indeed a complex and demanding technique, but it possessed immense power. It consisted of 4 main forms, and during his battle with Lika, Zeke had created a 5th. Beyond that, there was even a secret, its final form, a terrifying and destructive ability, the same one he had once used to slay the divine dragon in his past life. He wondered silently how his descendants had handled his other dragon techniques over time. Perhaps they had modified them. The thought only made him more excited. "Anyway," he said, "since I've already mastered the Strike Dragon combat arts, I'll continue with my physical training." He smiled faintly. Everyone has their own way of learning techniques. But before he could continue, Rangus suddenly shouted his name. "Zeke, please, teach me. I know it's a shameless request, but I want to get stronger, even just a little." Zeke looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll teach you." Rangus blinked in surprise. "Wait, you mean it? You'll really teach me?" "Of course," Zeke replied. "Why do you look so surprised?" "You were the one who asked. I just didn't think you'd agree so easily," Rangus said sheepishly. "I'm not lying," Zeke said, "and I know you're worth teaching." Just then, Lika approached them. Though hesitant, she spoke up. "Zeke, I'd like you to teach me too." Rangus turned to her, startled. "You too, Lady Lika? Is there a problem?" she asked calmly. "Honestly, I used to think that no one my age could defeat me. As a candidate to become the next head of the Eldragon family, I was confident in my power. But yesterday's match, it shattered my pride. I still don't know how you managed to use Lightning Aura, or how you wield it even better than I do." Zeke sighed. "So now this is my fault?" he muttered half-jokingly. Determined, Lika continued. "I want to become stronger. Strong enough to defeat our older brothers. And you as well, Zeke. Please. Teach me." Zeke fell silent for a moment, deep in thought. If you enjoyed this chapter and want to see what happens next, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next update in this epic story.